Hello and welcome to the Election Corner on One Man Think Tank. Today I'm bringing you my Senate 2020 election prediction for the third week in August. This will be accurate as of August 23rd, 2020. Now, as you can see, I've already filled out the states that I can assume are going to be safe. The ones which are indicated as likely are pickups for the other party. So Alabama for the Republicans, Colorado and Arizona for the Democrats. Because you can never truly count an incumbent out. Unless, of course, they're doing absolutely horribly, in which case count them out all you like. But none of these are in that position. If the Democrats do amazingly, we could see an Alabama that is blue, Doug Jones holding on to his seat. While if we see the Republicans mount a very strong defense, Colorado and Arizona could very well be in play. But these scenarios are in no way going to happen in your average map, so right now they're likely, and likely enough. Not including them is just a tease. They're nowhere close to being at all in the toss-up range. But speaking of which, as you can see, we have 10 states really up for contention. Alaska, Montana, Kansas, Iowa, Texas, Georgia's, both the special election and the normal election, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Maine. Now, here's the rub of it. All of these states are Republican states. The Democrats have already made 2 pickups while the Republicans have made 1, resulting in a net gain for the Democrats of 1 seat. Meaning, in their worst case scenario, the Democrats still gain a seat. The real question is, can they gain 2 more? Starting off, in order to narrow things down, we'll knock out some of the likely seats just to make life a little bit easier. Starting with the 2 Carolinas. 1 likely Democrat, 1 likely Republican. In North Carolina, Cal Cunningham, the challenger to incumbent Republican Thom Tillis, is doing an amazing job of absolutely beating him. The only polls which show them at all close are the ones are Republican internal polls. And, just to further expand on this, Thom Tillis is not doing a very good job of campaigning in general. On the other hand, we have the Democratic race, other statewide Democratic races. The gubernatorial election, where the Democrats are up and away, running away with that election, over 50% of the vote towards the incumbent Democratic governor, while Joe Biden is slightly inching ahead of Donald Trump, though I don't think it's enough. Right now they're both at mid-40s, and I'm willing to bet they'll break for Trump. But for the Senate election, we're seeing Cal Cunningham slowly see a gain in his lead, putting him in the high 40s while Thom Tillis is mid-40s. The only polls that show them close are when they're both in the mid-40s. And I believe this moves it into the likely territory because Cal Cunningham is gaining more and more, and if the election were held today, he would probably win the seat. Not to mention, what we're seeing is suburban voters flipping from Republican to Democrat. They went Republican, undecided, Democrat, and it's really hard to make them do the reverse in a single election cycle, especially when you only have roughly 2.5 months before the election day. Meanwhile, in South Carolina, we're seeing what I can best describe as the Beto O'Rourke of this election, potential Senator Harrison, running against staunch incumbent Lindsey Graham, one of the most well-known state national senators. Now, Lindsey Graham his polling numbers are steadily declining while Harrison is slightly increasing. I think on election day it's going to result in some really close elections and possibly even flip a House seat. But not likely it's going to actually flip the state in general. I do recall, I think Cook Political might have moved it to likely Lean's election, but I haven't seen enough polling coming out of South Carolina to make me believe that's at all the case. And while we're in the Deep South, let's give another one to the Republicans. The special election is likely for the Republicans. On Election Day, they're actually going to be holding a jungle primary, and the final election will occur after the big general election. And in my opinion, there's a solid chance the Democrats could get locked out, but more likely, we're going to see the incumbent Republican lose out to one of the 2 leading Democratic nominees, either Raphael Warnock or Lieberman, I think. well, I can't remember, but the now leading Republican challenger will win and win the top seat, and a Democrat wins the second seat, and then when it goes to a general, because you can't tie the new Republican to the challenging Democrat, the new Republican to Donald Trump, the challenging Democrat has no chance. As for the main election, we'll get back to that once we're done with the rest of our likelies. Speaking of likely, Alaska. Alaska, we're seeing the incumbent senator, Sullivan, a Republican, see his numbers dropping. He is actually not dropping. They are very low. We're talking high 30s. However, his challenger, a senator by the name of, I believe, Gross is general, is the House, I mean. I can't remember maybe the name of his challenger, but his independent challenger, who would caucus with the Democrats, is polling very decently with low approvals, including beating him in one or two polls. But we're talking Alaska here. While I could see that libertarian bend really break for the Republican Party, like I said, we're 2.5 months out, and that's not much time to really make an impression enough to turn a state completely out of the other party's favor. Likely means Democrats could win it, but it doesn't mean that it's likely to break anytime soon. But if the Democratic challenger manages to frame himself as the Democratic Lisa Murkowski, this could very well flip Alaska for the election. And the last one is Texas. Texas, big deal, Texas could flip at the presidential level. At the Senate level, it's not looking like... It's going to keep fluctuating between leans and likely. It's not going to get down to tilt. What we're seeing is the incumbent Republican is polling high 40s, while his challenging Democratic opponent is polling mid-40s. And those numbers haven't been changing. And in Texas, the numbers break for the Republicans. That's just how it is. Every state you can default assume is going to break one way until it changes. Virginia, you could assume was going to break Republican until one day it didn't. Colorado, the same thing. Arizona seems to be heading very quickly down that route. And Texas one day will be there. But for right now, you can assume it's barely going to break Republican. And all Cornyn, the incumbent Republican, needs is it for them to break Republican, a small chunk to break Republican, while the Democratic challenger, Hager, needs a lot to break for them. So I'm not putting those chances likely. But now we're left with our actual toss-ups. So before, those were all of the seats in play. Now we have halved it down to our actual toss-up seats. Montana, Kansas, Iowa, Georgia, and Maine. These 5 seats are incredibly important because genuinely, in the next 2.5 months, they're going to fluctuate a lot. Speaking of fluctuations, let's start off with Montana, a state that is Steve Daines versus Steve Bullock. Steve Daines is the incumbent Republican. Steve Bullock is the soon-to-be former governor of Montana. Now, I believe Bullock went in after doing a lot of testing to see if he could win this thing. There's a solid chance he can, and we got some good numbers for him. But now we're seeing some more polling coming out of Montana, and it's really showing those swing voters are really breaking for the Republican. However, Bullock is still polling really high comparatively, and Steve Daines isn't breaking 50%. For those of you who remember back to 2018, the Montana Senate race, which had an incumbent Democrat and a challenging Republican, the incumbent Democrat, Tester, won by a fraction of a percent. He was barely above 50%. It was an incredibly close race. I am thinking that's probably what's going to happen with Daines, but we'll have to see. So for right now, it is tilt Republican. This is one of those ones where it's going to be flipping a lot. Down to Kansas, we have another one for the Republican Party, where it is leans Republican. Kansas is a state that is seemingly slowly turning on the Republican Party at the statewide level, in a way that I can't really compare to any other states. In fact, it might be setting up a new precedent for states in the Midwest. In fact, I actually argue in Midwest, Great Plains. I'd argue it the closest we have is Montana, where you see enough Democrats getting elected at the statewide level, it results in the state having enough of a surprising bipartisan streak. though Montana seems to be evening back out to Republican over as a full slate, as opposed to going the Alaska route of having these coalition governments of Democrats and Republicans. But Kansas, the Senate race, is very contentious right now. We are looking at the potential for a Democratic flip. However, it's not as likely since Chris Kobach lost his primary to a fellow named Marshall. Now, I know I said this before, but I'll say it again in a prior video, not this one. Marshall is the worst candidate Kansas could find outside of Chris Kobach. That's the thing. He was an amazing candidate when compared to Chris Kobach, which is the equivalent of comparing, frankly, eating a dirty diaper to being lit on fire. Both of them really suck, but one of them sucks a bit less. So Kansas Republicans chose the dirty diaper, barely, and he's not polling well. His opponent, Barbara Boiler, is an incredibly clean, straightforward candidate, and that's what won them, the Democrats, the governorship in 2018. And this could very well win them the Senate seat because there is no incumbent. But Kansas is a state that breaks for the Republicans. We're in a two-party system. States break one way or the other. Kansas City is not that big of an urban area, neither is Wichita. Or Topeka. So we're not going to see these massive breaks where you see all of the suburbs suddenly flip to the Democratic Party and up there goes the state. Kansas doesn't actually have that much of a suburban scene. It's a lot more rural, ex-urban, which is still very Republican at its core. Unlike the suburban voters, which have kind of flipped to defaulting to the Democratic Party, using the classic, well, I'm an independent line. Up to Iowa. I've been watching the Iowa polling really close, and for those of you following it, the Democrat is polling very well because the Republican Senator, Ernst, is polling really badly. Overall, the Democratic Senator is mid to high 40s, challenger is mid to high 40s, while Joni Ernst is mid to low 40s, with some good polling showing her slightly above mid-40s and her opponent slightly below mid-40s. But Iowa has had a strong history of, at the end of the day, going back to the Republican Party since about 2012. So for right now, it is tilt Republican, leaving us with 49 and 49. People who have seen my last video, people who have been watching me for a while, already know where this is ending. But we'll go down to Georgia with the main election, which is leans. Ossoff, who gained fame for being the first special election after Trump and losing handily, is polling quite well against Perdue, who is the incumbent senator, who has been heavily tied to Donald Trump. We're talking ad after ad, article after article. Every coronavirus response is tied on this guy, and as the second highest statewide office people can vote for after the presidency, he is not looking good. Ossoff is polling really well. However, I'm expecting a lot of voter suppression in Georgia, and also, let's be totally fair, Ossoff hasn't won the suburbs yet. He's polling decently, but he is winning those mid-40s matchups I was describing that were for Tillis. As well, if you're only winning the mid-40s matchups while your opponent periodically polls much higher than you, that's an indication they get the breakaway voters. And lastly, we have Maine with Susan Collins, and right now I'm putting it as leans. I really want to put it as likely, but I think Susan Collins could still win this pretty handily. But to use an analogy for, if you've watched this far in the video, you're an election junkie, so Missouri. Susan Collins' race is like Murkowski's race. No, not Murkowski. I've just forgotten her name, the Senate witch. McCaskill, Claire McCaskill. Is that right? Oh my goodness, I am a tad tired. But it is basically like that race where you had an incumbent who shouldn't be there who kept winning. That is Susan Collins. However, given the very polarizing shift politics has taken, I think Susan Collins' days are very much numbered. Though we need some more polling out of Maine that actually shows the Democratic challenger really breaking away. We're talking either a 4-point gap where Susan Collins is in the low to mids 40s, or the Democrat being above the 50s, and we haven't seen either of those yet. But as you can see, 50-50. The Senate goes down to the presidency. That is my prediction. But if there's enough of a push, Iowa and Montana could flip. We still have to see how the people of Iowa react to, frankly, being left out on their own after the storm by the federal government, and Joni Ernst defending that choice. Montana, Steve Bullock's campaign really started just over a month ago and is starting to get going, and we're seeing his numbers ticking up slightly. And like I said, Steve Daines' numbers are a bit lower. And this Kansas and Georgia race both could be more in play. But right now, this is a map for the Republicans still to lose, but the Senate's probably going 50-50. So the presidency will not, whoever wins the presidency won't just decide who controls the executive, but probably who controls the Congress. Now, with that all being said, if you liked the video, leave a like down below, and also drop a comment while you're down there. If you want to see more from the channel, please click the subscribe button and the notification bell. If you want to follow me off network, or off YouTube, off video, I don't know the phrase, you can find me on Twitter at OneManThinkTan1, twitter.com, link down in the description below. But, most importantly, as always, have a wonderful day.